acquaintance and favor. They had no doubt that Miss Havisham would do something for me. Their doubts related to the form that something would take. My sister stood out for property. Mr. Pumblechook was in favor of a handsome premium for binding me apprentice to some genteel trade, say the corn and seed trade, for instance. Joe fell into the deepest disgrace with both for offering the bright suggestion that I might only be presented with one of the dogs who had fought for the veal cutlets. "If a fool's head can't express better opinions than that," said my sister, "and you have got any work to do, you had better go and do it." So he went. After Mr. Pumblechook had driven off, and when my sister was washing up, I stole into the forge to Joe and remained by him until he had done for the night. Then I said, "Before the fires go out, Joe, I should like to tell you something." "Should you, Pip?" said Joe, drawing his shoeing-stool near the forge. "Then tell us. What is it, Pip?" "Joe," said I, taking hold of his rolled-up shirt-sleeve and twisting it between my finger and thumb, "you remember all that about Miss Havisham's?" "Remember!" said Joe. "I believe you. Wonderful!" "It's a terrible thing, Joe. It ain't true." "What are you telling of, Pip?" cried Joe, falling back in the greatest amazement. "You don't mean to say it's—" "Yes, I do. It's lies, Joe." "But not all of it? Why, sure you don't mean to say, Pip, that there was no black velvet coach?" For I stood shaking my head. "But at least there were dogs, Pip?" "Come, Pip," said Joe persuasively. "If there warn't no veal cutlets, at least there was dogs?" "No, Joe." "A dog?" said Joe. "A puppy? Come?" "No, Joe. There was nothing at all of the kind." As I fixed my eyes hopelessly on Joe, Joe contemplated me in dismay. "Pip, old chap, this won't do, old fellow. I say, where do you expect to go to?" "It's terrible, Joe, ain't it?" "Terrible!" cried Joe. "Awful! What possessed you?" "I don't know what possessed me, Joe," I replied, letting his shirt-sleeve go and sitting down in the ashes at his feet, hanging my head. "But I wish you hadn't taught me to call knaves at cards jacks, and I wish my boots weren't so thick nor my hands so coarse." And then I told Joe that I felt very miserable, and that I hadn't been able to explain myself to Mrs. Joe and Pumblechook, who were so rude to me, and that there had been a beautiful young lady at Miss Havisham's who was dreadfully proud, and that she had said I was common, and that I knew I was common, and that I wished I was not common, and that the lies had come out of it somehow, though I didn't know how. This was a case of metaphysics, at least as difficult for Joe to deal with as for me. But Joe took the case altogether out of the region of metaphysics, and by that means vanquished it. "There's one thing you may be sure of, Pip," said Joe, after some rumination, "namely, that lies is lies. Howsoever they come, they didn't ought to come, and they come from the father of lies, and work round to the same. Don't you tell no more of 'em, Pip. That ain't the way to get out of being common, old chap. And as to being common, I don't make it out at all clear. You are uncommon in some things. You're uncommon small. Likewise, you're an uncommon scholar. No, I am ignorant and backward, Joe. Why, see what a letter you wrote last night. Wrote in print, even. I've seen letters. Ah, and from gentlefolks, that I'll swear weren't wrote in print, said Joe. I have learnt next to nothing, Joe. You think much of me. It's only that. Well, Pip, said Joe, be it so or be it so'n't, you must be a common scholar afore you can be an uncommon one, I should hope. The king upon his throne, with his crown upon his head, can't sit and write his acts of parliament in print without having begun, when he was an unpromoted prince, with the alphabet. Ah, added Joe, with a shake of the head that was full of meaning, and begun at A, too, and worked his way to Z. And I know what that is to do, though I can't say I've exactly done it. There was some hope in this piece of wisdom, and it rather encouraged me. Whether common ones as to callings and earnings, pursued Joe, reflectively, mightn't be the better of continuing for to keep company with common ones, instead of going out to play with uncommon ones. Which reminds me to hope that there was a flag, perhaps? No, Joe. I'm sorry there weren't a flag, Pip. Whether that might be or mightn't be is a thing as can't be looked into now without putting your sister on the rampage, and that's a thing not to be thought of as being done intentional. Looky here, Pip, at what is said to you by a true friend, which this to you the true friends say. If you can't get to be uncommon through going straight, you'll never get to do it through going crooked. So don't tell no more on 'em, Pip, and live well and die happy. You are not angry with me, Joe? No, old chap, but bearing in mind that them were which I mean to say of a stunning and outdacious sort, alluding to them which bordered on veal cutlets and dog-fighting, a sincere well-wisher would advise, Pip, their being dropped into your meditations when you go upstairs to bed. That's all, old chap, and don't never do it no more. When I got up to my little room and said my prayers, I did not forget Joe's recommendation, and yet my young mind was in that disturbed and unthankful state that I thought long after I laid me down how common Estella would consider Joe, a mere blacksmith, how thick his boots, and how coarse his hands. I thought how Joe and my sister were then sitting in the kitchen, and how I had come up to bed from the kitchen, and how Miss Havisham and Estella never sat in a kitchen, but were far above the level of such common doings. I fell asleep recalling what I used to do when I was at Miss Havisham's, as though I had been there weeks or months instead of hours, and as though it were quite an old subject of remembrance, instead of one that had arisen only that day. That was a memorable day to me, for it made great changes in me. But it is the same with any life. Imagine one selected day struck out of it, and think how different its course would have been. Pause, you who read this, and think for a moment of the long chain of iron or gold, of thorns or flowers, that would never have bound you but for the formation of the first link on one memorable day. End of chapter.